Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Today, I'm coming to you from the Saskatoon airport. About to get on a flight here in about an hour, so gonna have to be brief. Um, I hope everyone is doing well. It's nice weather here in Saskatoon. Um, and this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, which is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. I'm Eve Engler. And there are a number of developments in Canadian foreign policy. So I think I'll get right to it. If there's any problems that people are seeing, please do make some comments because I think everything's good here, but I'm not 100% sure. So this week, just today, a couple hours ago, the Globe and Mail published a piece by Jeffrey York about the fact that there are 4,000 Rwandan troops in Eastern Congo, more actually than there are M23 fighters with sophisticated weaponry. And the story points out that the Trudeau government refused to comment. The Global Affairs Canada refused to comment when Jeffrey York, the Globe and Mail reporter based in South Africa, when he got in touch to ask Canada's position on this matter. And as the story pointed out, Trudeau and Kagame have been close. And this is just a further indication of both the fact that Rwanda is heavily involved in this displacing a few million people in Eastern Congo over the past, I guess it's about a year and a half, 2 years now. And apparently they've displaced another million people like in recent weeks, according to the story. But also that the Canadian government has turned a blind eye to its ally once again, causing mayhem in Eastern Congo. Last night, I listened to this interview from France 24 with Kagame, and he was just justifying. Clearly, he previously they were denying any Rwandan involvement in Eastern Congo or with the M23. And now he was taking a different tack with basically saying that there's been Tutsis that have been displaced into Rwanda and that there's a possible genocide about to take place against Tutsis in Congo, and is setting the terrain to justify their military intervention. And this is just the latest of a 30-year-long process of justifying mayhem by Rwanda, Uganda as well, but principally Rwanda in Eastern Congo on the grounds that they're defending Tutsis using the sort of Rwandan genocide of '94 to justify all of this. And the Globe and Mail piece pointed out also about that the increasing gold production in processing near Kigali in Rwanda, and also cobalt, right? So basically they're pillaging Congolese resources, and those resources are finding their way into Rwanda and being processed and profited from by the Rwandans. The Travis Ross pointed out this story on Twitter from IT Liberté newspaper, left-wing Haitian daily or weekly, should I say, that the multinational force personnel, this is the wording from this document, giving them immunity to operate in Haiti. So this foreign mission says personnel, including locally recruited personnel, enjoy immunity from legal processes for all acts performed in exercise of their official functions, including their words and writings. This immunity continues to have effect even when they are no longer members of the personnel or employed by the mission, and after the other provisions in this agreement have expired. So all the foreigners coming to Haiti as part of this Kenyan-led mission that Canada's been pushing, the US, of course, is behind it all, they all have immunity, including the personnel they hire locally. And this is just the same pattern that happened with the MINUSTA, the UN mission, and that's part of why all these UN troops, including Canadians, got away with all these sexual abuses, all kinds of crimes, and basically none of them ever were held to account because they, as part of the agreement, they got this immunity. And so this is continuing with the new mission. This week, the Canadian government imposed sanctions against a number of Haitian gang leaders, which is a very odd thing to do. I don't think any of these gang leaders were going to be coming to Canada anytime soon, and they probably don't have any assets in Canada. I'm not sure if this is just sort of posturing designed to convey some sort of message, but that's what happened this week. There was also a Caribbean Development Bank meeting in Canada, I believe in Ottawa, this week. And the Caribbean Development Bank is an interesting one. So it has 19 members, regional borrowing countries, 4 regional non-borrowing countries, and 5 non-regional non-borrowing countries. Canada and the UK both control 10% of the Caribbean Development Bank. Canada was right at the heart of setting the bank up. I think it was in the mid 80s. And so this is just one of the tools where Canada has outsized influence within the Caribbean, principally the former British colonies, and you know, to the point where the meetings are actually happening in Canada. And again, it's the Caribbean Development Bank, and so Canada has vast influence within the Caribbean, as I've discussed in different sessions of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I've detailed in different books, in my Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, a little bit in the historical and the Canada and African book. So one of these elements of this influence in the Caribbean is played out, has actually got a bit of attention, unlike things like the Caribbean Development Bank, is the Canadian naval vessel that went to Cuba at the same time as the Russian vessels. And so this, I mentioned it briefly, I believe, last week. It's gotten a bit more attention this week. It's kind of played out a bit more in the press and on X and on Twitter. And the Canadian Commodore Linda Coleman, explaining why the Canadian naval vessel went to Cuba, I guess it's about 10 days ago now, said Canada is, quote, committed to maintaining a military presence in the sea and around our continent, and foreign actors coming into our neighborhood can expect to see our armed forces fulfilling their mission, which is to protect Canada. What a Russian naval vessel going to Cuba has to do with protecting Canada is a bit unclear to me. But this is the kind of framing that the Canadian military is doing. And same thing with Bill Blair, the defense minister. He pledged to maintain a credible military presence in the waters and airs across North America. If any foreign actor comes into North America, he said they should expect Canada will take action to defend its interests. He said the Canadian forces will continue to track the movements and activities of the Russian ships. So this is the framing Russian naval presence in Havana or in Cuba, which the Cuban government okayed, as sort of like a threat to Canadian security. And that's fine if they're going to do that, but you know, we have to apply the same standards, I think, more generally. And this issue with there's a huge brouhaha. The sort of right wing has been attacking the Trudeau government for sending this naval vessel to Cuba the same time as the Russian vessels, because it's like we're making friends with Cuba, who's this ally of the bad Russians, and Cuba's a dictatorship, and Trudeau has cozied up to this Castro dictatorship, and that's been the kind of like dominant media right wing conservative kind of line. And in response to that, the Trudeau government has responded by saying, no, in fact, we're there to be tough and to defend North America and the like, which is sort of tells us a little bit about how the debate on foreign policy works. It's the criticism overwhelmingly comes from a more hawkish, militarist, pro-American empire kind of perspective. But the the other part to this story is that, you know, if Russian vessels are a threat, then how about Canadian naval vessels? And one individual on Twitter posted a map of where the Canadian naval vessels are around the world, and basically half dozen of them are in dock and being kind of worked on, and half dozen of them around the world. A couple of them in Asia, obviously the one in the Caribbean, Mediterranean as part of NATO mission. I believe there maybe was also one in the Baltic. I'm not sure if that's correct, but he lists different places. And so if we're going to say that a Russian naval vessel in Havana is a threat to Canadian security, then certainly the Chinese government is on strong grounds to say that you know, Canadian, Filipino, U.S., Japanese vessel, which is right now just happened in the South China Sea, that's a threat to China. But that's not how the media kind of frames this stuff. Wayne Ear, the head of the military, in a story titled "Liberals Provide More Military, so it's time to push a more positive message." So the military is saying we should be more positive about the Trudeau government. And the head of the chief of defense staff is quoted saying, "The prime minister told me that defense spending is only going in one direction, and that is up." That's a grim state, that only going up, more military spending. But that is the direction of things. In Canadian Dimension, Tamara Lawrence has a good piece titled "Canada's Militarization of the Arctic Threatens Indigenous Communities and the Climate." And she kind of goes through the history of the sort of Arctic, Canada's militarization of the Arctic, and how anti-Indigenous it's been. I cover some of this in my military book, and how the Arctic Circumpolar Arctic Council, I think it's called, you know, has rejected it, this militarization of the North. And but the Trudeau government is really kind of framing their new military strategy with this "our North" kind of defending the North from the Russians, from the Chinese, and this justifies increased military spending, even though the people who are from the North actually don't want this. The NATO Association of Canada hosted the head of NATO in Ottawa, gave him a prize this week, Stoltenberg. There's also they're hosting David Cohen, the U.S. ambassador, on a discussion of what's at stake on NATO summit next month, coming up in the U.S. And the Stoltenberg and the NATO Association pushed all kinds of aggressive. Obviously, they're pushing the 2%. They pushed aggressive positions on of course on Russia, on China. And so Stoltenberg was quoted when he was in Ottawa saying, "China cannot have it both ways when it comes to Ukraine." He says that he's basically China should face consequences for assisting Russia. "It's too early for me to say exactly what's going on costs. My message is that we need to start assess that option and to consult on potential costs, because it's not sustainable and viable that China continues to fuel the biggest security threats for NATO allies, especially in Europe." So this is part of how the US is driving EU countries, like Germany specifically, which have huge economic relations with China, trying to drive them towards more hostility towards China, breaking off economic relations and the like. The way it's going to be structured, or increasingly structured, is China's backing Russia. Russia's a threat to Western European security, Central European security. Therefore, we need to punish China. And NATO Stoltenberg is clearly ramping up that kind of argumentation, that line of thinking. And he was making that point here. We saw that in the G7 statement. Tons of criticism of China. So they're trying to frame China as, blame China for what Russia's doing in Ukraine. In terms of what's going on in Ukraine, this week it was reported, the RT reported that the Russians are saying they destroyed Canadian APC vehicles for the first time. The Rochelle vehicle, which I think is produced somewhere in the suburbs of Toronto, called the Senator vehicles, and there was about 1,000 of those that Canada delivered to the Ukrainians. And so that's a kind of interesting development. It's interesting that the Russians are hyping having blown up some of these Canadian vessels, vehicles, should I say. Also, we saw that the Russians called in the U.S. ambassador yesterday, I think it was, on the recent bombing in Crimea. And so the Russians are blaming the Americans for this Ukrainian bombing. And so that, things continue with the proxy war, still continues to continue on in a sort of dangerous kind of state. And as I mentioned, the NATO is increasingly connecting that to China, and so is the G7. On the China file, as I mentioned a little bit ago, Canadian Navy vessels participate with the U.S., Japanese, and Philippines, a 2-day joint maritime exercise in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. That's, of course, a message to the Chinese. Also, you had on the front of the business section of the Globe saying that Ontario is calling on Ottawa to match U.S. tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. So there is this the protectionist kind of policies response that the U.S. Canada's following.
Announces the following when service to
Sorry, there's an announcement for the planes. On the foreign interference question, the bilingualism doubles the length of the announcements. So on the foreign interference file, a judge agreed to having the defamation suit from Han Dong against Global News, that basically Global has to pay his lawyer fees for their effort to have it dismissed, which the judge found that that was basically a slap suit. It was designed, corporate entity trying to use its financial weight to pursue a legal procedure that doesn't really have any basis. And so they said that the defamation suit can continue and that Global has to pay the fees that Han Dong had to put up for this to respond to their effort to have it dismissed. And in this, so the judge is saying there's a, Dong seems to have a good case here. And in this file, it came out that Sam Cooper, the Global reporter, who's a total fanatic, anti-Chinese fanatic, and who no longer works for Global, it said that this, I'm quoting here, Cooper, however, admitted that none of the documents reviewed named Dong, and none state that Dong advocated for the detention of the two Michaels. Right. So this was the explosive story that led to Han Dong having to leave the Liberal caucus, was that they were claiming that he advocated to the Chinese official to keep the two Michaels in Chinese jail as part of some sort of very bizarre, kind of hard to understand the logic of Liberal Party political strategy. And Dong, of course, completely denies this. And now it's coming out that Cooper is saying that there's actually nothing, even though this is what the big revelation that prompted this lawsuit, that there's actually no documents that actually name Dong. So we'll see where this goes. It never made any sense. And I think it's increasingly becoming clear that this tidbit, at least, on the foreign interference file is a total farce, which again, a bunch of people pointed out right at the time that it made no sense. On the Globe, in the Globe front page, I think it was on Tuesday, it was a headline, two senators alleged ties to China need scrutiny, activists say. And so Senator Wu and Senator Victor O, one appointed by the Liberals, one appointed by Harper in 13, are being accused of basically being Chinese puppets. And what them being Chinese puppets is that they challenge some of the dominant media and the political narrative around China, and they don't seem to want to, be just join into the U.S. empires. Let's move towards a war with China. But that's, that this is on the front page, basically saying that these Canadian senators are not, they're a threat to Canada. They're not loyal. In the piece, in this Globe Mail piece, they quote the senator appointed by Harper in 2013, Chinese Canadian, as saying that he's loyal to Canada. So it's got to the point there where it's like, they have to have these senators sitting in the Canadian Senate have to declare their loyalty to Canada as a kind of pushback to all this foreign interference kind of claims. And this is a total xenophobic affair. The Globe is sophisticated enough, of course, that the front page piece is quoting Chinese Canadian organizations, right? They know the race politics enough to know that they have to quote Chinese Canadian associations accusing Chinese Canadian senators of being basically agents of China. But nonetheless, where in the body politic, how this plays out is that Chinese Canadian politicians are threatening, if they're not uber supportive of the hardline position, they're threatening to Canada.
Here's one important message. We hear your name. We see any
So on the bus to Regina to do an event in Regina from Saskatoon a couple of days ago, we stopped at this gas station in, I don't know where, kind of on the side of the highway, rural, very small town, Saskatchewan. And in the gas station, they had, I think it's called Druthers. It's a sort of right-wingy, conspiratorial kind of newspaper. And it was free. So I took a couple copies and read it on the bus. Now, on the front page of one of these, in this newspaper, they had one of the issues. It said 10 reasons to rethink mass immigration to Canada. Okay, so 10 reasons to rethink mass immigration to Canada, and one of the reasons was foreign interference, right? So they're explicitly linking we have to challenge immigration to Canada because immigration to Canada brings foreign interference. Okay, so that link is being made. It's not being made like that in the Globe and Mail yet, but below the surface, that's the kind of some of the links being made, and you will probably find out probably soon enough. The National Post, this kind of politic will feed its way into the National Post. So I think that's it's important to see that kind of those dynamics playing out, the xenophobic dynamics that the foreign interference file are stoking. This week, the Trudeau government listed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. The speculation is they listed it in part because of the trying to be pro-Israel amidst a by-election in I think it's St. Paul's, the riding, I think, in the Toronto area, which has I think 15% or something like that of the riding is Jewish. And that's the suggestion. Obviously this issue of the IRCG being listed is something that's been floating around for a long time. Obviously all the pro-Israel groups have been pushing this for a long time. Now the Trudeau government had resisted it. It goes totally against how they got elected initially, right? Let's not forget that they said that we're going to restart diplomatic relations with Iran. That was their initial position, and then they basically the Israel lobby kiboshed that. Even though sectors of like Bombardier and the Montreal Business Council wanted that. But as Thomas Juneau pointed out in a big long article, the Israel lobby and their sort of agents within the caucus, Housefather and the other now the head of the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal, Michael Levitt, that they kind of push back against it, these efforts. Now, so they've the U.S. did this in 2019. The U.S. did this in 2019. There's all kinds of like logistical problems. There's hundreds of thousands of Iranians that have been in the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Many of them have been conscripted. So these people will basically going to have a serious problem coming into Canada. Some of them are, who were in IRGC are already Canadians, and there could be all kinds of problems that develop there. So there's some logistical problems, and in today's Globe and Mail, Thomas Juneau, who's like a sort of a security and analyst, establishment security analyst, maybe a little bit on the liberal end of the establishment kind of world, but I think he used to have a position in Trudeau's government, and now he's at University of Ottawa. He's saying, well, basically he's criticizing just that it's logistically problem because there's not enough resources. This intelligence agencies don't have enough resources already to deal with the sanctions and other policies they've already adopted, and this is just sort of like knee-jerk politicking rather than thought through kind of like empire building is essentially his argument. And that's I think an interesting question. Now the bigger picture here, I think, is that this is Canada's response to Israel unleashing mayhem in Gaza, looking to start a war with Lebanon, which I'll get to in a second. Obviously what happened a couple months ago about bombing Iranian diplomatic compound in Syria. Israel's been bombing Syria, Iranian officials and whatever in Syria for years regularly. So this is kind of like the backdrop is we're going to deepen the sort of anti-Iran kind of measures. Obviously, we're not listing the Israeli military. If we're going to be listing the Iranian military, certainly we should be listing the Israeli military. That's not happening. In fact, we have our Canadian officials celebrating Canadians fighting the Israeli military. So we're many, many, many steps away from listing the Israeli military. The Iranians are saying they're going to designate Canada's army as a terrorist organization in response. Well, I'm not sure if this is going to happen, but that's people online reporting this. So, again, I think the context is always important, right? Canada has this history with Iran, passively backing the coup against Mossadegh in 1953, supporting the Shah's brutal rule through the 1970s. This is part of the background, supporting U.S., UK belligerence towards Iran. And so that's part of the backdrop. Now, another thing, this is in terms of like our the political sphere. You have the NDP a day or two before this, the Trudeau government announced the listing. The NDP put forward a motion calling for justice for Iranian rapper Tumaj Salehi, which was passed unanimously. And I'm certainly prepared to believe that this individual is detained in a way that would be repressive. But the NDP doing that is just adding to the anti-Iranian kind of ethos in Canadian political culture, right? Which is connected to a staunchly pro-Israel ethos, which they're claiming that they are, questioning Israel. Now that's an NDP position increasingly, but on Iran, they still continue to take aggressive positions. And so I think that that's something that has to be, challenged and criticized. On Lebanon, so is Netanyahu yesterday or day before announced that he was we're going to slow down in Gaza, slow the killing machine down in Gaza because we're going to devote more forces to Lebanon. And so the Canadian government apparently is preparing plans to evacuate the 45,000 Canadians in Lebanon. And the sort of back and forth with Hezbollah is picking up. The Israeli officials keep threatening to turn Beirut into Gaza, and turning Beirut into Gaza. So we may be in a situation where things quiet down a bit in terms of Israel's killing in Lebanon, in Gaza, but they increase in Lebanon. Now, what's happened in Gaza is, more and more and more documentation of the horrors. So Save the Children today reported that 20,000 children in Gaza are disappeared. Okay, so I think it's 15,500 are documented killed, confirmed killed by the health ministry. 20,000 more are disappeared. And we don't know where they all are. Like, the expectation is, I think the number saw 4,000 saying that they thought it to be dead under the rubble. And thousands more are just lost to their families, have been taken by Israel, and other kind of, it's not exactly clear. So 20,000 children are been on top of the 15,500, I believe it is, confirmed killed. And this is just devastation. This is horrible. The 2/3 of the water sewage in Gaza has been destroyed. And then yesterday, the Israelis assassinated Gaza's chief engineer for water and environment and 4 other municipal officials. They blew him up. So obviously trying to sabotage the Palestinians' ability to rebuild their water systems. There was a post online by this group, a rally or march yesterday, maybe on Saturday in Toronto, and saying Canadian patriots have had enough of the pro-Palestine protesters. They are starting to fight back. And it showed these like kind of convoy types waving Canadian flags. Downtown, I guess Yonge and Dundas, the center of downtown there in Toronto, rallying again on the other side of the street of pro-Palestine protesters. And so sorry, just talking to Joshua. And so these Canadian patriots, this is the framing of patriots, against the pro-Palestine people. And so I posted, what's patriotic about hundreds of Canadians fighting for a foreign military? What's patriotic about subsidizing $500 million towards $500 million in donations to charities funneling money to Israel, including one supporting the Israeli military? What's patriotic about that? Why would it be patriotic to support Israel? It's a totally bizarre dynamic that needs to be interrogated. Now, of course, what's actually going on. It speaks to how Zionism has long been part of Canadian political culture. It speaks to anti-Arab, anti-Muslim racism that, the patriots, the quote unquote patriots, are tied to. But I think that we can challenge this kind of movement on their own terms. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why the pro-Israel lobby never responds directly on the foreign enlistment, right? When we challenge the foreign enlistment and inducing for the Israeli military, or the charities question, because they understand that on their own terms, on the sort of right-wing, quote unquote, patriotic spectrum, it doesn't add up, right? It doesn't. They're they undercuts their support. The Toronto police chief was photographed with a guy from Rebel News that had a shirt on saying "fuck Hamas." So the head of the Toronto police photographed taking a picture with a guy with a "fuck Hamas" t-shirt on, and that happened right at the same time. There's a bit of a scandal about this rebel van that is caught in the streets of Toronto, and it's a digital advertising screens, and on the sides it says, is this Lebanon? Is this Yemen? Is this Syria? Is this Iraq? Then the truck displays images of what appears to be Muslims praying and protesting in Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto. There's Palestinian flags, and the square's concrete arches are visible in the images. The messages on the truck then say, "No, this is Canada. Wake up, Canada. You are under siege." Okay, so it's just this anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian van going around Toronto, basically saying that people coming from the Arab countries or Muslim countries are taking over, under siege, da 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 da. Okay, so this created a bit of a controversy. The hate crimes unit of the Toronto Police was going to look into this. A lot of brouhaha online, politicians denouncing it. And so, as people pointed out, that you have the same Toronto Police that is, meeting with Rebel News people or taking photos of Rebel News and their "fuck Hamas" t-shirts is probably not going to take this that seriously. That's an interesting way to challenge it. But I think that the other part, that the more interesting element of this story, is that this van first appeared at the Walk with Israel on June 9th. Okay, so tens and tens of thousands, overwhelmingly Toronto Jews, took to the streets to support Israel's Holocaust in Gaza, amidst the International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, UN saying extermination, blacklisting Israel for killing children, et cetera, all the horrors. They take the street to walk in support of this. And this van, this what's now being described as anti-Muslim van, appears, according to the Ezra Levant, the Rebel News head, the van was actually sponsored by a group called Canadians Opposed to the Occupation of Our Streets and Campuses. So it's an explicitly anti-Palestinian endeavor. Okay, so the issue doesn't get any attraction for being at this Walk for Israel. It's not until later on. So when it's associated with the Walk with Israel, that doesn't necessarily engender much response. That may just be coincidental. That may be coincidental, or it may be because there's a desire to exculpate the pro-Israel Jewish groups and organizations from stoking anti-Muslim sentiment, right? In our political culture, liberal politicians will criticize liberal in a big L and small L sense, will criticize Islamophobia. They won't really criticize, anti-Palestinianism, and they won't criticize necessarily, the Holocaust in Gaza, but mistreating Muslims, that's different in the political ideology. So that's interesting. I think that it's very well possible that others noticed this van during the Walk for Israel, were critical of the van, but didn't necessarily want to highlight that in the context of a Walk for Israel, because that's not really to point out that the main Jewish organizations in Toronto are stoking Islamophobia, to point that out really sort of directly as part of their support for the Holocaust in Gaza. That's kind of a marginalizing thing to do. In fact, people often call you anti-Semitic just for doing that. Now, on that front, this week there was a rally in front of the Toronto District School Board, where they were about to adopt an anti-racism strategy. An anti-racism strategy that included, obviously, anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, Indigenous component. But why hundreds of people showed up to rally against it was because they were going to have a little bit on anti-Palestinian racism. And they said that this discussion of anti-Palestinian racism in the strategy, anti-racism strategy, that was anti-Jewish. And so they organized this rally. Totally outrageous. Sorry. And so the sort of pro-Israel group, CJ was openly denouncing, including anti-Palestinian racism, and basically saying anti-Palestinian racism is a threat, discussing anti-Palestinian racism as a threat to Toronto Jews. On the similar kind of vein, at the Monk debates, the Mehdi Hassan, who was one of the people debating this question, is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. I believe that was the wording of the question, which is a totally odious wording of a question, a totally anti-Palestinian wording of that question, or of a debate on the subject. But that's what they did, and it was Gideon Levy and Mehdi Hassan, and Douglas Murray was one of the people, was the pro individual, and Douglas Murray then published a piece. The headline: "The suffering of Palestinians in Gaza is all down to Hamas." All of it in the hub, right? All of it, everything, all suffering in Gaza is all Hamas. Basically, Israel could do whatever it wants, and it's all Hamas to blame. But so that was the
Laura, I think you should take over.
Oh, sorry, I just unmuted. So we've lost our friend Eve, so I really should we give him a few minutes to see if by chance he gets it back? Maybe if anyone in the group has anything to share, we could unmute you. Anybody? Anyone bid to any demonstrations or anything you'd like to share with us? Any of Eve's event? Have any of you attended Eve's events?
Can I make a slight comment or two before
Yes.
Catherine talks?
Please do.
Okay, I want to say that I have been protesting singly in front of the synagogue in our area. And I would walk up and down during the Saturday services, carrying a sign saying "shame" and a Israeli logo on that. And I did this for a number of weekends. And not yesterday, but on Saturday, I walked up and down without a sign and talked to some people there that were going into the synagogue. I didn't talk to some people. One guy, he said, "Are you going to the event?" And I says, "No, what is the event?" And he says, "It's a bat mitzvah." And I says, "Oh, are you the father of the girl?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Congratulations." I carry a camera all the time with me. I took his picture, and then I went home. I thought I wouldn't protest a bat mitzvah. And the next morning, which was this morning, I got 2 mornings, I got a call from the police saying, cautioning me about protesting in front of the synagogue. And I thought that was unwarranted harassment. And I'm quite disturbed by that. How they found my name, how they targeted me, and if anybody can offer me any advice, I would appreciate it. Maybe I need a lawyer. Okay.
Okay. No, I'm sorry that happened. By the way, you're asking me to, I can't unmute anyone because Eve didn't transfer that to me. And oddly enough, are any of you having this problem? I can't actually send any. Well, wait a minute. Maybe I can now in the chat. Okay, I just did. Yeah, I can send in the chat, but I can't unmute anyone. Catherine, can you unmute yourself? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay,
Am I
good.
unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I think I am. Your experience sounds similar to what happened to me, and when I was, I think I mentioned it a couple months ago or a month ago about passing out leaflets about Scotiabank and RBC's complicity in ecocide and genocide, and was stopped by a police officer who threatened to arrest me if I didn't give my name and address and everything, name, address, and date of birth, and seemed quite serious, including calling for backup and following me halfway down the street anyway into a library. So it's, I think, and this was because of one call from the RBC, somebody in RBC. So it is, I mean, it's just one more example of this kind of crackdown on small protest. I mean, nothing really major, just trying to talk to people. But what was I going to, I just today, I'm down at their local library in the little village of River John, because I was hoping that some of our small local organizations would be willing to sign on to the Arms Embargo Now petition as organizations. So I know somebody who's in the Odd Fellows, and he had signed a ceasefire petition before, so I know he was on side. And anyway, I called him and he said, "We're having a meeting tonight." And I said, "Well, should I come?" And anyway, he said, "Well, if you're going to come, you should come before it starts." And so I got here, and they wanted to know, he introduced me to everybody, and they wanted to know what the issue was. And I said, "Well, maybe I should read this letter and then you'll understand what it's all about." And they said, no, I want to know now. And I said, "Well, it's about the war on Gaza." "Oh, we don't do anything political." So it was a wasted trip, and it's political, I guess. I mean, I said it's nothing to do with parties, but yeah, so that was a shame. But I got to. We have a library out, so we're wireless, so I got to join in here, so that was great.
Well, do you know, was that arms embargo did anything? I read something a while back that said the arms manufacturers had not even been notified about Canada's arms embargo for new arms shipments. So, I mean, is it even being implemented at all?
That's what I read too, that they haven't been told that there will be no, I mean, it's it sounds like it's just a ploy, like they want to look like they don't want bombs dropping on people,
Yeah.
but their money is more important, or their ties with Israel is more important, or who knows what. But actually, I wanted to ask everybody on a different topic if anybody knows if there's an organizational sign-on letter or anything about calling for Canada to stop supporting the upcoming invasion of Haiti by the forces that are, the Kenyan forces who are being deployed.
Does anybody know of such a petition? So you could unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Thanks. It'd be great if anybody hears of anything like that, or it would be nice to, or if anybody has an update of what's happening in Haiti, I'd really be interested in that too.
There used to be Canadian Haitian Action Network or something, and they had a campaign. I think it was called Hands Off Haiti. I don't know if they're still active or not, but that might be a good place to start. There was Eve's had a guest on less than a year ago who was an activist in Haiti who lives in Montreal, I think, either Montreal or Ottawa. If you go through the YouTube, you will find that I think his name.
You mean
name's-
Jeff Kaiti?
Yes.
Jean Saint-Ville?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
That would be a great.
I do, yeah, and I do look at Canada Haiti Information Project. It used to be CHAN, I think Canada Haiti, and I think Canada Haiti Action Network, but
Yeah.
they have information, but I haven't seen anything, that a group could just sign on to. We might have to make our own statement, yeah.
Or ask, maybe they have something going on. The other one is, I believe the Kenyan president has signed off on sending Kenyan troops to Haiti.
They've changed their mind?
No. Signed off as in they're in full
Oh, yeah.
support of doing it,
Right.
even though it's against the constitution of Kenya to do that. Because
Yes,
there's nothing in the Kenyan constitution that authorizes the police to be used in that way. So they're trying to figure out ways to have it be Africans killing other Africans instead of the obvious, but really it's the US and Canada that are behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that's all I have on that particular interesting topic.
thank you.
Have any of you actually gone to any of Eve's events for this latest book tour, or have you read the book? Is it getting any commentary, and at least in alternative press? No,
I haven't heard.
no, okay.
I went to on the first tour, the Eastern Canada tour. I just went to the online meeting, which was fantastic, and Owen Schock's talk was wonderful, and Eve, and they've gone into such fantastic detail, and they're the evidence is so completely clear of what Canada's motives are, and it backs up everything Eve says every week, I guess. But yeah, that was really
There was a good meeting at the University of Winnipeg. Unfortunately, Eve couldn't be there, but he zoomed in from the bus between Regina and Saskatoon. And it was a very good talk, and just as was said, it's pretty hard for anybody to not see what's going on. So yeah, it was a good meeting in Winnipeg.
Can I ask you, in the Canadian media, the mainstream media, are you seeing coverage decline about Gaza? Is it, or if any of you actually watch that?
No coverage in the Winnipeg Free Press at all these days.
There's no coverage at all.
Not very, very little. And, you know, it doesn't matter how big the rallies are, that doesn't get covered at all.
But are they covering what's actually happening? Are they still showing what's happening in Gaza?
No, there's days that there's absolutely nothing. I haven't been following the Free Press as much as, you know, Al Jazeera and stuff, so I can't speak for that. But I know that I've seen days where nothing is in.
We know, I think our friend Eve is not coming back. I think he's lost to us. So I think unless anyone has anything else they want to share, I think we can sign off and go have our dinner.
Okay.
Okay.